Yep.
Yes, see a thumbs up. All right. Yeah, so all of you are business people, business school students, learning a little bit about design, and I am a designer who's spent a good part of my a good part of my career trying to learn about business. Neil said I should spend 30 minutes or so speaking to all of you and then leave some time for some questions and discussion at the end. I am SVP of design at Fitbit. And as Neil said, I've moved from only doing, not only, but doing hardware design, physical product design to uh, leading our user experience design, meaning everything that you see on screens, whether that is on wearables, in phone applications, or on the web. And then also we have a service, so service design as well. There will be three sections. So I'll start off giving you a little bit of background about who I am. And if there are any really pressing questions where you just have to ask me something midway, by all means, just ask me as we go. Um, I was born a long time ago when photos look like this, post black and white, but pretty grainy. My parents, my dad was a lawyer, and I would go into his office when I was young, and he was on the phone a lot, and he was reading and writing in his briefs a lot. My mom was or and still is a graphic designer. I went into her office, and it was filled with art supplies. So as a kid, you can imagine which one was more fun. So I ended up following and in my mom's footsteps. I spent a ton of time in her office growing up. This is what's called Letraset. I did a lot of this and actually did some work for her clients when I was young. This is the precursor to Illustrator. You actually had to rub down every letter by hand. And my mom would come along and she'd slap my hand and rip the letters I had put down crooked and make me do it again. So I learned about craft and the importance of that from a very early age. Um, as much as my mom was a graphic designer, I always had a real love for physical things and making things, and that was everything from models and designing my own cars and stuff and weapons. You find things like X-Acto blades in a graphic designer's office, so I would glue them together and throw them at the wall, and then my mom would get upset and make me fill the patches and repaint. And at some point early on, when I was a young 11, 12 years old, the first Macintoshes came out, and I got pretty interested in designing things there as well, designing cars and such. So I was exposed to the idea of creating and designing from a young age. If we fast forward into the college years, I actually knew that design as a academic pursuit is fairly trade school like. So I actually went to UC Berkeley to get my undergraduate degree. I studied philosophy. Raise your hand if any of you decided that you should go into philosophy to have an amazing career as a philosopher. Um, that's where all the real money is. Don't let the business school people tell you otherwise. I was the weird one in that graduating class of philosophy students who did not intend to be a lawyer, which is most of them, or a philosophy professor. I do think I learned some wonderful things. I learned how to uh, dissect arguments, how to tell stories, how to create my own arguments, and I think and create my own narratives. And I think that's a pretty important skill throughout your career, no matter what it is. You telling your story, expressing your point of view, being a critical thinker. I think are all really powerful skills. Following Berkeley, I got a degree in industrial design at California College of the Arts, based in San Francisco. My mom happens to be on faculty there, and she was on faculty from when I was 6 or 7 years old, and still is on faculty. So I was exposed to design from a very early age, and actually knew I wanted to go into industrial design probably when I was 12 or 13 years old. Most people do not; they discover it through some other path later in life. It was pretty amazing. It was an open campus, so you were exposed. You can see people discussing work and critiquing work in public spaces. So even if you were an industrial designer, you were exposed to architecture, you were exposed to graphic design, user experience design, and all of the different disciplines. I had to make a little bit of a nod here to Neil on the right. Neil gave me my first industrial design internship. That's where we met in the mid 90s. And that is the product on the right, which was a 3D TV, like a wearable, basically three-dimensional or a micro projection TV experience of sorts. On the left is my other internship that I had in design school and the product that was created, which is, you could look at that and say, I have no clue what that is. That was a fiberglass blob about the size of a city bus that was inside a tiny room in the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. And it was being guided throughout the room by GPS that was attached to the roof of the building and by proximity sensors in the room and seeing people and walls. So you had this nervous, very large school bus sized thing that was rolling around and tipping and interacting with people in a very sort of interesting way. Um, Moving on, after I graduated, I started working in the consulting world at Frog Design, which is a global design agency that works across design disciplines. It was an interesting time to be an industrial designer there because, quite honestly, they were spending a ton of time and energy on the internet, which was at that point a new thing. Um, and uh, and I actually had a client that I had on the side, which was a startup, which was this company Telesprit that you see that did a single button hands-free phone. This was in the very early days of mobile phones, before any of you probably had mobile phones or were thinking about phones. It used to be very expensive to make long distance calls. And so this was a phone that you could buy in an airport for about $20 and use while you were on vacation for a week and have a local number, and it was all voice authenticated and voice operated. So I had this client and I decided to leave Frog Design, and I actually took this client on the side and I was sort of operating as their head of design, doing branding like you guys are doing. So you see the Telesprit logo work down there, as well as the design of the physical phone. And then I met through a friend these two people, Joe and Kathy, and they had just started a design studio. And I ended up joining them. Joe actually soon thereafter, within a year or so, left. He started InCase, which is the company that maybe you know. They do backpacks, phone cases, things like that. At some point, they were the #1 accessory brand for Apple through Apple and Apple stores. And then Kathy left and bought a company called Heath Ceramics, which, if you do the math, and you said there were 3 of us and 2 left to do other startups, that left me. And I stuck around. I brought in a couple other business partners, 2 guys named Scott and Claude. Scott is currently head of design for Beats by Dre on the left, and Claude is head of VR, AR design, hardware design at Google now. And that's me on the right in younger years. We had the design studio was called One and Company. We did lots of different sorts of work. We did some Kindles for Amazon. We did Nike watches. We did laptop mobile mice for Microsoft. We did snowboard boots for K2 and Burton Snowboards. We got to design some furniture and lighting. What you see at the bottom center is a $40,000 silver-plated wood coffee table, and we designed mobile phones and things like that. One of our big clients was HTC, which is a smartphone manufacturer based out of Taiwan, that was actually the first company to do an Android mobile phone. And that company, HTC, actually made an offer to acquire us. And so my partners and I decided, you know what, we've been doing the consulting thing for a dozen years now. This seems like a pretty exciting time to get into mobile phones. This was 15 years or more ago. Sorry, no, not 15 years, 2008, 12, 13 years ago. And we designed everything from the first Android phone to, if you knew HTC Vive, I was involved in the first generations of designing their VR platform. Bottom left, if you know Under Armour, I led our partnership working with HTC's partnership working with Under Armour on their connected health and fitness platform, meaning connected scales and wearables and things like that, and even some imaging products. I will note one of the things that was interesting is that camera that you see on the left that looks like looks like a little, I'm blanking the term, that comes out of a submarine.
Periscope.
Periscope, thank you. Was an interesting process for us and a learning process. As a design team, we used to create a lot of new product concepts that we would pitch to the CEO, pitch to the chairman of the board, and usually they would look at these things and go like, oh my gosh, that's lovely, wonderful, okay, really exciting stuff. And then they would leave the room and we would congratulate ourselves and it wouldn't go anywhere. So by the time that came around, we thought that we were doing so much with cameras in phones. There was a lot of like connected camera stuff going on, point of view cameras. And we said, we do have so much amazing software in this space, we should create new hardware. But this time, when we developed these concepts, we partnered with a couple business leaders in the company to map out who are the target segments, how are we going to sell this, what is the size of the market, TAM, et cetera. And we had a very complete story when we developed this and presented this. And we knew how much the investment would be to build and sell and market this product. And we had the design and the experience. And then they were forced to say, like, yes, we will fund this, or no, we will not. They ended up deciding to fund it and move forward. So I think the idea of partnering across disciplines is pretty powerful. And that moves me to today. Eventually I left HTC and I joined Fitbit. I joined to build an industrial design team, which was outsourced to an agency prior to me joining. And over the course of my 5 years or so, I now lead a team of about 75 people that includes industrial design, the hardware design that you see on the right, as well as the design of our mobile app, the design of our wearable operating systems, everything that happens on the screens of our devices. We have some web work that we still do, although it's the 21st century and 2020, and there's less and less of that. And I have teams across the United States and Hong Kong and Romania and Belarus. So a lot has changed in my years there, and I've expanded sort of the types of design that I am exposed to and leading, from physical to UX design or digital design, and also to our services, because we now have a premium subscription service, and I have a team that does content design as well, thinking about how we present and film and do audio content. So with that, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit today. That's kind of my background and what I've been in my career, and talk a little bit about designing holistic experiences. There's a good chance that as business students that at some point you will be selling a product of some sort. You will be dealing with a brand. You will be presenting compelling value propositions. It might be a physical product. It might be software. It might be services or anything else. But I think it's important to think about the holistic experience when designing any product or combinations of products that need to work together with one another. So I think, UX design, computers are fairly new, right? People, when I grew up, I was not using a computer. I was in my teenage years that I started to use a computer. I thought email was silly when it first came out. My wife, then girlfriend, was going on a semester abroad, and she wanted me to go to the library and email her, and I thought it was crazy. So I think in many ways it starts with hardware. So if I think back to where we got, I think about tools. Here's some early tools. These were not designed, but they were used as tools. They could be used for shelter. They could be used for cooking. They could be used for self-defense. And then somewhere along the way, we had an early, whether this is a product manager, a engineer, a designer, who decided, you know what, I think I can make this rock tool a little bit better. Guess what? I can swing this thing much better if I attach a stick to it. Right. So then all of a sudden you have, the idea of a bludgeoning tool, a hammer of sorts. It could be used for defense. It could be used for hunting. It could be used for building. Now, fast forward to where we are now, and you have a very highly technical hammer version of a modern day hammer. And engineers and designers have spent a lot of time on the weight balance and the materials and the manufacturing and the human factors to make sure that this is the absolute best hammer, so that when you swing it, it will be a fantastic experience. Except that now you can also get a hammer that you don't actually have to swing. You just pull a trigger, and it uses compressed air to shoot nails, a nail gun. And so the point is that technology continues to evolve. And I think we as designers need to think about what the experience is and what the best experience is, and not just assume because hammers used to be a thing you swing, that now there might be a better way to hammer, especially if you are in construction and need to not just, put in let's say 500 nails a day, not just the one to hang your picture. And then all of a sudden you have the computer, and the mouse became your hammer because the hammer was on screen. And if you wanted to move something or put something in the trash, or, hammer a nail digitally, you were doing that via a mouse. And so, the tool changes, and the context for that tool can continue to change. And so, as a designer, I like to also think about where we're heading and the role of technology and how humans interact with technology. And I actually find that sci-fi, whether that's books, movies, et cetera, can be a really interesting way to go. I find science fiction at times can be very exciting and inspiring, and sometimes scary, and it usually elicits those emotions when um, it's somewhat believable. When it's too far out there, it's like, okay, I get it. But I think where it really gets you is where you can imagine, like, yeah, that could be the world 10 or 20 years from now. So I think about films like Minority Report. Tom Cruise's computer was a couple gloves that he put on, and the entire computer display was hovering around him, right? So the way that you think about a human interacting with a computer is not me sitting here in front of a laptop tapping buttons, but full body gestures and movements. And you look about how he was going into a store and how he would interact with um, customized, personalized advertising, talking to him about the last time he was in Gap. And what's interesting here is what you notice is the idea of hardware has disappeared, right? Like, and that's one of the panics that some industrial designers have, especially in the technology space, is when things become all screen or all display in this, sort of future, what is my job? I don't have hardware to design when everything's floating in front of you and just the information moves when I wave my arm. Um, and I think there is a little bit of reality to that. I mean, this is a phone from kind of years ago, but this is early mobile phones. It was half keyboard and buttons, and you can look at the size of the display, and you would think this is ridiculous if you tried to use it today. And look at where phones have come, right? It's like this is taking a big step towards that Minority Report. If you just think about the amount of real estate that a mobile phone takes today versus yesterday. And then what about deeper experiences? The Matrix, virtual reality, augmented reality, the idea of plugging into some alternate space where you have control over physics. That's a very powerful thing. And as I mentioned, I was very fortunate to work on Vive. And if anyone here, hopefully people have tried virtual reality, the first time I did it was fairly mind blowing. Just the idea that you could create an entirely new world, set of experiences, services, products, and not obey the laws of regular physics and scale, was to me just mind opening. Um, I think about a movie like Her, if anyone has seen this, with Spike Jonze, where basically Scarlett Johansson is his operating system. His whole computer, his whole life, his interaction, he doesn't have a phone. He has a couple earbuds. And this is years ago. This is before the AirPods. This is before all of this. And now you can see how this sort of um, this conversation with your operating system, you think about Siri, Alexa, how we talk to computers now to get information. And this was before all of that. But that's what made this sort of a compelling story, is because you could see this happening. And of course, here, and these are dated products now, but you can see, like what Amazon has done in terms of speakers around the home and in the car and things that you can talk to in your environment. And that idea of the voice being the key to your operating system and your computer, is a really powerful thing, whether that is, surrounded in your environment or in your ears. And it's not just about audio, right? Like this is from a company named Braggy, and they read gestures. When you nod a certain way, it does things. And so you can think about like replacing the mouse, replacing touch screens, because you have gestures and voice to control computers, and they become fragmented and they are on your body and in the space around you. So the point is, there is a tremendous amount of technology out there, but I think whether you are a designer, an engineer, a product manager, a business leader, it's really important to create solutions that really work well for real people. I tell my team all the time, we need to think about real people in the real world. And that's where testing and prototyping and understanding people's wants and needs and doing that research is critical. And there's a saying in the VC space that being too early is the same thing as being wrong. And so I think if you think about something like Google Glass, this was seen as a very silly thing. The idea of wearing a computer or an interaction with a computer on your head, and part of it is the implementation. It was very obvious that that's what you were wearing. You were wearing Google Glass, and you probably worked at Google, and it looked like this bizarre thing. And clearly on the geeky side and just not the kind of thing that people wanted to adopt. But now if you look where that's moved now, here's another company that's doing that today. Would you recognize this? This is now integrated and thinking about a person. Clearly, it's a model, very styled and everything. But you can look at the pair of glasses, and this has an interaction, a retinal-based interaction built into it. It's from a company called North Focals that was acquired by Google a couple of years ago now, I believe. The Segway. Here's another one. Amazing technology. Here's a two-wheeled vehicle that balanced on itself when you stood on it. I mean, this was mind-blowing when this came out from a technological perspective. Did it change the world of personal transportation? Boy, it sure didn't. There was just something wrong about the idea. People were not expecting, the idea was that everyone would be using these to get around, riding on sidewalks, things like that. The reality is they became a little bit invasive for the few people who did have them on sidewalks. They moved pretty fast. They could be dangerous. Now, have they found a place in vertical markets? Absolutely. Warehouses, post office, things like that. They do have a place, but I think it could be that it was a technology that was too early before its time, because think about what that is now. And this is like 20 years, 15, 20 years later now that you see people on hoverboards and everything else riding around. Similar, if you think about personal mobility, electric bicycles is the hottest category in the entire bike industry in the world and growing rapidly. Electric skateboards. So the idea of like putting technology and intelligence in personal mobility is not the bad idea, but having the understanding of the right time and place and what people will accept, I think is pretty important. There's a very famous industrial designer named Raymond Loewy, and he had a principle called MAYA, M-A-Y-A, which was most advanced yet acceptable, meaning, yep, push the boundaries, but if people think it's crazy or geeky or what have you, then it's probably not going to succeed. So I think that's always been something that's been top of mind for me. The other piece I like to think about when thinking about whether it's a product, a service, an environment, is that there are 24 hours in a day, and you need to think about all of them. And what I mean by that is I work at Fitbit. I can think about a product that I use, that I wear. If I have a terrible experience opening the package and there's some sharp edges and I cut myself opening the package, that is a bummer, right? And I'm like, okay, I've started off my new experience, my experience with my new product with a bad experience. Or if, after a few days of using the product, I have to go and it's time to recharge it. And the recharging experience stinks. The charger doesn't clip in well. It's, feels like it's cheap. Those are all bad experiences. So I like to think about all of the different touch points that an experience has or that you have with a brand, and they all need to be well crafted. I think this to me leads to this idea of, again, people in the world and the idea of user-centered design or user-centered product development. And I'll just tell a little story or a couple stories here about some projects I did many years ago. And this was for Microsoft. They were a client of ours, and we designed a lot of mice and keyboards and things like that for them. And there was a switch. There was a point in time where most people had desktop computers, big, powerful boxes that sat on top or under their desks, and they had a monitor. And it switched where laptops were more popular than desktops, which means people were moving, around. They were working at home and then working in an office and then working in a cafe and then sitting at a park and working. And so we were really thinking about, like, how do you make a mouse that works for people who are off mobile with their computing? And we looked at it and we said, well, okay, here's kind of the kind of computer a person was carrying around, and here's the mouse, and they're putting it in a slim laptop bag, and the mouse is so much fatter than the computer, and everyone complained about it. Yeah, there's this big bulge, or I broke my mouse because it was sticking out, and I banged it. I banged my bag on something. So we learned a lot about the people in the world and how they were using products, and we started sketching around the idea of, like, how can we make a mouse that is ergonomic, but at the same time packs well, so that when you're moving around, it's not taking up the space. And so we were looking at ways that we could transform a physical form to something that would pack more flat, whether that was clipping it together, wrapping it around, bending it, inflating it, etc. And we eventually ended up with this idea of creating an arc structure and a mechanical structure that would sit flat. And then when you bend it, it would snap in and hold the arc. And we created all these really ugly, rough prototypes. It's like not different than what, you guys are being asked to do with your logos. Start off rough and dirty and sketch things and then get more resolved. And then we started, refining them and building, working with the engineering team and building physical versions of these products. And in the end, we ended up with a mouse that had a very elegant form. It was named, you guys are doing naming. This was called the arc mouse because it took an arc shape when you bent it. But it also packed very flat. So it had this very satisfying mechanism in it that made this nice click and snapped, into form and then released. And when you packed it in your bag, it took up, not much more space than some of the pens that you might have had. And this, completely changed how they were thinking about mobility for Microsoft, and was a huge success for them because there was a story that they could tell about why this is a better solution for these people who were now using laptops rather than desktops. Another one we got to work on in my agency was the early Kindles. And this was a thing where this was trying to replace a book or a sheet of paper. And so for us, it was important not just to just, hey, how do we make this thing as cool as possible? But looking at how people read. And people have all kinds of different postures. People do not sit in one position. They move around on the sofa, they roll over on their side, they go from the chair to their bed. And we sort of watched people, took photographs and sort of, and let that inform the design, So one, we had to have at that point a physical keyboard, but you can see we tried to make it as soft and fluid as possible so that it wasn't visually interrupting. We wanted things to be very quiet because what you want to focus on is the words on the screen or the words on the page. You can see one of the things we learned, for example, is that turning the page forward was the main action people do when reading. I want to turn to the next page because I've read. And because you were changing hands, sometimes holding left hand, right hand, two hands, we put next page buttons on both sides. And we hinged them on the outside so that you didn't accidentally press them. You kind of had to just squeeze the edge to turn the page. So there was a lot of prototyping and learning and testing with real people to make these decisions. Another piece that I think is pretty important, and this is obviously relevant because you're thinking about personal brands, is this idea of psychonomics. Ergonomics is how people interact with physical things. Psychonomics is a term that I believe was coined by Tucker Meister, who's a well-known designer. And it is about the idea of how you emotionally connect to an object. As I mentioned earlier, I had a great opportunity to work with Under Armour on a partnership when I was at HTC, and their CEO, Kevin Plank, used to tell this story about how he was in a Big Five sporting goods store, and he saw a mother with two kids about ages 12 and 9, and the 9-year-old kind of snuck off, and he went in and he grabbed an Under Armour football jersey and he put it over himself, and he said, and he holds up and he makes muscles. He's like, Mom, look, I can do anything, and it was this transition where all of a sudden, because of his experience of with the brand and what it stood for, there was a transition from him just being the kid in the store to being the star football player. And I think the idea of ritual, what that means, it's like if you run or you go to the gym, you put on your workout clothes or your running shoes, you're making a transition there. You were like, okay, I'm ready to work out. If you love cooking, you pull out your favorite knife or spatula. There is a ritual in that, and there is an enjoyment that puts you in that mindset of now I am capable. And I think the idea of thinking about how products affect psychology is pretty important. And I'll maybe try to illustrate this by looking at the idea of over-the-head headsets. And here's an architecture, right? It's got two big speakers over your ears. It's got a strap over the top that connects those earpieces. They're all very similar in terms of the actual technology inside and how they're structured. But this one is particular for gaming, and in particular, people who are interested in first-person shooters. So if you look at, for example, the adjustment detail, the green piece on the right, it looks a lot to me like a rifle barrel. It has aggressive color palettes, so it has an aggression to it that is appropriate to that gaming audience. Now, Here's Bang & Olufsen, which is about high quality audiophile experiences. And you have leather and, very warm, rich, premium color palettes. You have aluminum. You have the arm, the way it attaches to the earpiece that looks a little bit like the arm of a turntable. So it's kind of like referencing that. Same thing. It's got speakers and, earpieces and a band that attaches the two over the head, but a very different customer and a very different psychology. And even if we go into others in that space, Beats, here's something, fluid form, bright poppy colors. It's for a younger customer. It's meant to be really striking and stand out when you're wearing it, like walking around on the street and such. And it just has a very different impact, even though the overall architecture of the product is the same across all three. And this is not only limited to the physical space. If anyone here has used the app Headspace, which is a meditation app, this is the look and feel of their app. You have sort of muted color, lots of color. It's friendly, but sort of muted, right? So there's, I would say color, but in a calm sort of way. You have very playful illustrations, right? Meditation is a scary thing for some people. Not scary in like I'm, afraid for my health or my life, but it feels a little amorphous. It's hard to understand like what's the value of meditation, and they're making it very friendly and approachable in terms of the visual language and how they present their digital product. Now, a counterpoint would be something like PayPal. Do I want playful and fun when I'm paying people or receiving money? No, I want it to be pretty precise feeling. You see in the center, the $50 is highlighted very clearly top center in the only sort of bright pop of color on that screen, because it's saying like, hey, here it is. You're reviewing this. Are you sure this is the right amount? And there's a precision in it in terms of how it presents information. And you want to have a different emotional experience when transferring money than, for example, playing Call of Duty. Here it is, in the gaming space again, where it's very aggressive and has a different feel. It's tactical, it's got a militaristic feel, but these are all digital products and experiences. So I think that the idea of the psychology or the sort of emotional reaction that you have to products is very important for success of the product, connecting with customers, and building a brand. And so maybe I'll sort of tie this up with talking about when a lot of this comes together and some historical examples of when physical digital services come together in harmony. This is an early iPod, the first generation iPod. Apple was not the one who invented the MP3 player and music on the go. They came late in the game, but what they did was they paired it with a great way to browse lots and lots of music on the device, as well as how to best manage your music on the computer. So it was, and made downloads and the struggles people used to have, getting music onto an iPod or onto an MP3 player was just, that's why they failed. And Apple solved it. It made it seamless to go from the physical experience of listening to the music and putting the earbuds in your ears to managing your music through the service and buying and, later purchasing music. And so that was a great success there. The thermostat was unchanged for who knows how long. And Nest, yes, did they do a beautiful modern version? And, did they make the interaction on screen with a digital screen as opposed to just a physical measurement of temperature? They did, but I think what was really powerful is also the mobile app and the connected IoT part of this. And that's where the real innovation is that you could go into an app and see energy consumption. If you were away from home, and you left on vacation, you could turn off your heat remotely to save energy because you forgot to do it before you left. You could warm up the house before you got home if you knew you were going to be there and it had been, snowing out. And so that connection between the physical product and the digital was really powerful here. Things like Pokemon Go, in my mind, there are two pieces of hardware in this experience. There's your phone that powers it, and then there's the actual world you live in. And the fact that it uses the entire physical world as the playing field to map these AR experiences on top of, I think is really powerful. And it means you can take it anywhere and have a unique experience to yourself and anywhere you go. And the last one, I think, is Tesla. Obviously, Tesla has made all kinds of news in the recent years. I think what's really unique about them is they thought about transportation and building a car not like a car company. They thought of it, there's a Silicon Valley technology approach to how they built a car. Meaning, until Tesla, when you bought a car, it got worse. It got older. It started to perform not quite as well. The gas mileage wasn't quite as well. Hey, guess what? Tesla all of a sudden, a month after you bought it, because they have a connected software experience, they update the software the same way that you might get an iOS update. They're like, guess what? You now have 50 more miles of range. Guess what? Your car's now a little bit faster. Guess what? You now have, uh, you know, 9 more virtual fart noises that your kids can play with. And so the idea of like buying a piece of hardware that's connected to a software and a service that changes and adapts and grows over time is a really powerful thing. A guy on my team has one, and he said it was crazy. I got a software update that enabled the car to self-drive from a parking space to meet myself and my daughter. We sat and we bought ice cream and we sat on a bench, and I called the car. And when we were nearly done, the car pulled up in front of us. That wasn't an experience he paid for when he bought it, but he got it, 6 months later. And so those are the kinds of things that I can think can create a really powerful connection when you think about the entire experience across hardware and software and services. And I thought I would wrap up here just with maybe a few things that I've learned kind of along the way and along my career. And I really hope I'm still learning things. I like to say that for myself and for people I work with or people on my team, to be appropriately uncomfortable is a good thing, meaning you've brought a knowledge base and a set of skills and experiences, but you should feel a little bit uncomfortable. There's enough new stuff that you are able to push yourself forward. So a few things I've learned. I want to share some things on the difference between working in an agency, for me, a design agency, versus on an in-house team. It's quite different. I think some of the benefits of living or working in the consulting world or in the agency world, you get tremendous variety. You tend to get a lot of learning and do a lot of things quickly because often the length of engagement is not the same as when you're in-house and you're working over years and repeating the same, similar product families and such over a long period of time. So I think the exposure is fantastic. I think there's a purity in working in an agency or in a consulting firm. The expertise that you've been hired for is what you get to focus on and deliver. I think sometimes, if I would contrast that to in-house, I would say, like, if you were making a meal, you were a chef making a meal, and you said there's an appetizer and a main course and a dessert. Sometimes agency can feel like you're making one of those pieces. So it's like you are the dessert chef and you have created the most spectacular cake. But if the in-house team that is responsible for, let's say, sales, marketing, brand, engineering, et cetera, did a crummy job with the appetizer and the main course, the overall meal may not be that great. And sometimes as an agency, if you have great, I think, really solid partnerships with your clients, you can be in there deep and be at the table and sort of having the effect, that you would want from the deeper relationship and ensuring that the quality of the outcome is there. But sometimes as an agency, you hand off and you hope for the best. So I would encourage anyone who's in the consulting space to, I think, cultivating long-term relationships is a really powerful thing being in an agency. Being in-house, I think you have to learn to collaborate with others who have different viewpoints, who may have different goals or different perspectives. You're exposed to a lot more. You see the entire pie. You get to, and it's important to build those relationships, because if my team builds and designs a new wearable this year, guess what? We are going to do an update of that product family, probably next year, which means we are going to be working with the same people. We need to collectively learn both how we make the product better and how we work together. So there's an ongoing learning and collaboration that is across all the disciplines. I am working, let alone the different disciplines within design, I am working with mechanical engineers and electrical engineers and firmware engineers and software engineers and product marketing teams and sales teams and product management, globally. So it's like we all have to work really well together and learn how to continue to improve that as part of an in-house team. And that's what I think leads to a company's success. There's this idea, and this was a new one to me at Fitbit that was introduced a couple years ago, and I am responsible for the design organization at Fitbit. If you had asked me prior at Fitbit or in any other job and said, who's your top priority team? I would have said the design team. We had to flip that. Fitbit was going through some struggles. And what we said, my first priority team, I report into the CEO, so I'm part of the executive leadership team with the heads of engineering and sales and legal and HR and finance. That was my team one. We were team one, my top priority team, meaning that when you become a leader, you have to think about who are you accountable to. And it was important for us that strategically we were aligned, that we were communicating decisions, executive decisions, in the same way and at the same time. And that's how you get a company to move in one direction. If I were just responsible and thinking only about the design team and giving them what I thought was right, and the engineering team was managing, the leader was managing the way that person thought was right, and finance and so on, you can essentially have a bunch of people in the company that are not rowing in the same direction. So that was a bit of a revelation for me. And then that's also something that scales down. What that means for me is that my head of UX for devices, my head of UX for mobile, my head of UX research, my head of industrial design, they had to be a team one, along with their counterparts in their engineering disciplines, so that they were thinking about being aligned, so that they were messaging. So it's a concept that ladders down, but that's something that pivoted for me a couple of years ago when we put this in place. And the last one, and this is very much related to that, but I've come from design, and I, without question, think of myself as a designer. And I love being a design leader, but there's a difference between being a design leader and a company leader. And as I've gone through my career, that's something that I've had to sort of wrap my head around and what that means. And what that means is that I am representing design, but I need to think about what's best for the company. And sometimes that means killing a product that I think could be, meaning removing from the roadmap a product or piece of software that I think could be a really amazing thing because it's not the top priority, or we don't have the people or budget to do it to the quality level that we want. I am involved with things like how Fitbit's in the process of being acquired by Google right now. Part of my job now is not just to be a design leader, but to be a leader for the company and figure out how do we best manage our employee base through a challenging transition. Being acquired by a company is a big deal. There's a lot of cultural change and other things and anxieties that people have. So that is a different, role for me. And what I appreciate about being a designer is being user-centered. I'm thinking like my customer, my audience for this process, if I think about something like managing a transition or other big, corporate level changes, is I'm thinking about that as a design process. What are the steps? How do I want people to react? What are different ways, like thinking about different concepts for how might we communicate things best? Like, should we do it company wide? Should we do it in small groups? Should we do it in one-on-one? Should it be a combination of those things? How do we best tell the message, and craft the actual words? And, is it better in an email versus in person? And so thinking about crafting those kinds of experiences is something that, I think that I like to bring to my leadership. So I take some of the expertise and the skills that I've gathered as a designer, but I bring it to this idea of being a leader of the company and not just a representative or a leader of the design team. So with that, I will say thank you. And in these times, stay healthy and human.
Well, thank you, Jonah. That was fabulous. And you've probably answered most of the questions that I had. In fact, you have answered most of the questions that I had. So I'm going to hold off asking any of the rest that I've got and see if one of the students, has a question or a comment or just feedback for Jonah. We all need feedback.
Excuse me. So I was wondering, Jonah, like when you like get up and like go log on to work nowadays, like what are you bringing to like your job? What's the what are the things you're doing day by day?
Are you asking like what does my job look like? Like what am I responsible for doing? Or
Yeah, like what are your like direct responsibilities?
so a number of things from a design standpoint. I am I am still connected to the actual creation of our stuff. I review models of hardware, right? Look, I have like little bags on my desk of pieces of hardware samples and things that come in and models. So I still am involved in that. The team presents to me. I review work, whether it's physical, digital. That's certainly part of my job. I am part of now, quite honestly, a lot of my time and space now is also managing an acquisition. And managing my team through an acquisition. We are, I think approaching, and the estimates are somewhere around New Year's of this year, but it's been ongoing for about a year. It's a weird thing to operate as an independent company, knowing that the intent is to be acquired by a much larger company. So there is a lot of ensuring that my teams have the right amount of information. There are some interesting things going on. I have a team in Belarus, in Minsk, and I don't know whether anyone here is familiar with what's going on in the news there, but they have a president who, in theory, essentially stole the election, and there are endless protests and uprisings. I have people in our office there. We have some designers and engineers. There are people on our team there who have been shot with rubber bullets, people who have brought in and interrogated, people have been put in jail for protesting, people who have been beaten by the police. So this is now part of my job, is like, how do we support people like this? How do we get them legal representation? How do we provide a way for them to exit the country? And so like part of my job, I'm a designer to a design, manager to a design executive, but now I'm responsible for ensuring that, people's health and safety is protected. And, there's similar things. It's interesting. I have a team in Hong Kong. China is starting to exert more force over Hong Kong, and that changes the dynamics of, our office there. So there are, I would say, pressing political situations that are now part of my job description. So it's fairly broad what I do on a daily basis. It can be everything from reviewing colors to looking at icons or new mobile app experiences to managing political situations. I think the thing I'm trying to create overall is a culture that is, one, safe and healthy, and two, is contributes to creativity and innovation and craft. And I would say those are probably some of the consistent themes in anything I'm doing.
I hear that. I've been thinking more about like the design management part. So having taken some management and etc. It is like, are you applying as many of the principles, or is it just like the mechanics are different?
In terms of the design management?
Yeah, like you're probably doing like design work, but
Yeah, so
it's probably like
I'm not
working through other people.
I will show you one. The only thing I've designed is this clock face, which I did on the weekend. 2 weeks ago, just for the election, because I still like that as an outlet, but I am not hands-on designer anymore. I also, with 75 designers in 4 locations around the world, I cannot be the final approver. So when I'm reviewing design, I need to have a leader of UX design, a leader of industrial design, et cetera, and people that I can trust to make decisions. And the way I like to say it is not if I got hit by a bus, because that sounds terrible, but if like a magical vacation fairy tapped me on the shoulder and sent me to a tropical island for 6 months, like, do I have people in place that I'm like, yep, that's cool that I'm on the tropical island because they're going to handle it. That doesn't mean that I want to disappear and not be involved. But at my point, I like to, one, set up a culture and an environment and a set of tools and processes that enable teams to be creative and function very well. Two, I like to be involved early on where it's open and there's discussion and there's feedback that I can provide that might help just provide a perspective. And it doesn't mean that I say like, oh, do it exactly like this. That's not what I want to do. I just want to provide a perspective, some debate, and then I have to trust the team to take it forward. I don't want to be the person who's rubber stamping at the end. That doesn't work. It doesn't scale.
I understand. Yeah. Thank you.
Syed, you got a question?
Sorry, sir.
I saw your name pop up on the screen here. Have you got a question?
I just wanted to comment about the Burton snowboards. I'm really interested in snowboarding and especially the curve designs Burton does. Just wanted to comment that that was very exciting.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've designed snowboard gear. That was 15 years ago, but for about 6 or 7 years, we did complete lines of Burton boards and bindings. And here's something, is in our design agency, we actually had a Tahoe cabin that was a tax write-off that the whole team could go and use whenever they wanted because it was our winter testing facility. But we would actually 3D print parts and test them. We would take existing boots and take Dremels and saws and hot glue things to them, and we would test new ways to build boots in working with our engineers in very rough, ugly ways. And we would take them out and test them. And we would it was a fun time. We had pro snowboarders who would come stay with us, and they would give us their insights, and they would test things that we would prototype. And it was sort of going straight to the high end of the customer range.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Jonah, I just want to go back to. Oh, let me just do one little thing, Francesca, and I'll back to you. Just one thing to Carter's question about whether now that you're in executive management, whether you still get any hands on design time or use any of your design skills. You actually addressed that in talking about how some of the things you've learned as a designer apply very well to the role of executive leadership, and maybe pull that out a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I think there is a process from going. The way I would decide it is what I think is magical about design or any sort of development process is you go from nothing to something, and that nothing could be a product, whether physical or digital, or it could be a set of processes for a team or a company. It could be certain communications. You are creating something and you have an audience that's receiving that thing or using that thing. And so to me, I like to still follow those steps and, brainstorm with all those processes of brainstorm with other people, do some research. How have others tackled something like this in the past? Whether that's, managing the transition of an acquisition or, talk to people, read up on it, do the research, think about how we want people to feel through this, and think about what kinds of things would solve that. So there is still that brainstorming and developing concepts and thinking through it. And then on the quite tactical level, I still have sketchbooks, and my team is doing products and designing things, and I sometimes will. Yep, other people got sketchbooks too. I will sometimes sketch through on my own just so I can understand what they're going through trying to solve this problem. I don't take these and share with them, but it helps me understand the process that they are going through. It connects me to their process. I'm not going to say like, hey, see this sketch I did, make it like that. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to sort of if there are difficult problems to work through, I will sort of use it to wrap my head so that when I'm reviewing and providing, feedback or perspective, that it's an informed perspective.
Francesco, you had a question.
Yeah, quick question. Thank you, Jonah, for the presentation. I would wanted to go back to one thing you said earlier. I think when you were working at HTC and you would go in these board meetings or in these meetings with exciting ideas or bringing some design ideas or product ideas, and they would end up not going anywhere. If there is an advice you could give us as either designers or people on the other side that would need to make monetize an idea or something, is there a common ground or some things we need to look out to avoid during this process?
Yeah, to me, it's a little bit of thinking about what the outcome is that, or outcomes you would like, um, and perhaps outcomes you would not like, and then working back. Like the outcome that we wanted was not to get a round of applause. The outcome we wanted was to put some amazing new products and experiences out into the world in people's hands and improve the brand and the business. That's the outcome we wanted. Now, we did not go through the process of saying like, okay, that we knew that's what we wanted. But then if you say like, what needs to be true? Okay, so what's the step before that? Well, the company needs to put resources, dollars, and people behind it, right? And so then how do you get to that point and work back? And I think this was a more, quite honestly, I felt younger in my career at that point. I was in my early 30s or so at that point, and I mean, I had a decent amount of experience, but that was my first real in-house experience. When I went from consulting to being in-house and just not knowing how things work, because when you're a consultant, they come to you with a program and you execute that program because they usually intend to do something with it. This was, like, okay, we're taking care of all the stuff that we knew was on the roadmap, but we see opportunity to help grow and do exciting new things because, designers, I think good ideas can come from anywhere. But like certainly as designers, we had lots of ideas, that we would generate. And so providing a path for that, and I would say early on, and like these were big, we did big shows. We would fly to Taiwan. We would work on these like concept vision, sort of future vision for HTC programs. We would rent out like these event spaces, and we would have motion designers doing these amazing presentations. Like we would be in like these 5,000-10,000 foot like museum and event spaces. And we would say, okay, here's our future of imaging presentation. And here's our future of gaming. And here's our, smartphone is the hub for the home computer. And we would build all these things like what happens if, if your phone became, you replaced your gaming console, then what? Like what are all the accessories and services and things that you would build around that? And we would design these like, this, like we were spending a decent amount of money, to be honest, like putting together these models and prototypes and presentations. And it was like, wow. And we would look at it, we were like, look at this thing we created, but it ended in a round of applause because there was no ask. There was no there was no ask, there was no what next. And so I think we sort of at some point realized like, okay, we did this now 2 years in a row. And like they think, wow, our design team's fantastic. That's what we got. They're like, God, you guys just are really creative, amazing stuff. But nothing came out of it beyond that. And we didn't really want the pat on the back. So we thought we're like, we need to almost like put a contract in front of the CEO and force him to make, like what we realized, he did not have to make a decision, right? We were not saying, will you invest in this? Here it is. And that's where we just started to think about that. So I do think that idea of like, what is the outcome and what steps need to happen for that outcome to be true?
Great. Well, it's right on time. And if you have just a little more time, I'm going to offer the students to ask one more question before we wrap up. Is anyone else has got a question or a thought? All right. Well, it looks like not, but before I say goodbye, I want you to speak to one thing that we were talking about right at the beginning. There was a question of whether or not it was necessary for students to generate more than, a few sketches on a page of a logo. What's the value once you've already got an idea to generate more ideas? And you've mentioned a few things in the time, but I'm sure you've got something to add to wrap it up.
Yeah. It's one, I find that when you are sketching or doing whatever way that you're generating ideas, more ideas come from that. Like you don't run out. I find that more and more come. I find that it is important. I think that there are, for any design solution, I would say there are millions and millions of awful, crummy solutions, but there's more than one good one or more than one great one. And that's part of my sort of learning as a design leader also, is that like, if I set the parameters for what success is and a designer on my team comes up with something where I'm like, yeah, that checks all those boxes, but it's not what I would have developed. I'm like, well, there's another great solution. It's just not the one that came from my brain. So I do think generating lots of ideas is really valuable. You explore new areas, you move to new places, you will do a lot of really shitty stuff. And it's important to do that because you got to get that out, because that gives you a reference point for what the good stuff is. And I do think the more you explore sketching logos, trying new jobs, trying anything new, you get a new reference point, right? It's like, I'm not sure if that's the job I want, but I'm going to have a much better sense of whether it is or isn't once I'm there, and then you can sort of, whether it's in life or, sketching a logo, you will, the more points in your path, the better you can sort of triangulate towards the right thing.
Well, Jonah, that is sage a way to end the presentation. Thank you so much. That was really, I learned a bunch. I'm sure, I hope the students did too. And I'm sure they did.
Yeah, thanks all for your time.
All right. So everyone, that wraps it up for today. I know a few of you wanted to talk to me about various things, about making meetings, about give feedback to some of the logo comments I made. Stick around if you want that. I'm going to stay online, but everybody is free to go. And I have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Thanks, Jonah.
Thank you, everybody.